Right, for more on economic reforms and policies needed to ensure growth and jobs, let's speak to ActionSA leader Herman Mashaba, Build One South Africa deputy leader Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster. Good to have you both, and thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And let's maybe start here and just get clarity. Have you now concluded as ActionSA, Mr. Mashaba, that you are not part of the GNU? I don't think you even got the statement of intent at this particular point.
Well, yes, good evening, Thabo, and good evening to Newzroom Afrika viewers. Absolutely, ActionSA is completely independent, is not part of this grand coalition of the ANC and the DA.
Yeah. Yourself as Build One South Africa, you are still waiting for details to be given to you from what I'm hearing. Have you been given those details? Are you any clearer?
Absolutely. So we've been engaged. And as far as we're concerned, there are a number of scenarios to look at. You know, you have the GNU, and then you have various opposition parties that we're speaking to about collaborating with. And so we haven't made a final decision at this point. We're reviewing and making the various considerations and actually even having conversations about some of the issues that we find in the framework itself.
Hence, I brought you in here. I would have thought Rise Mzansi would have come as well, but unfortunately they couldn't, because I'm trying to get a sense of how far apart are you from one another, for example, when it comes to that question of growing the economy. Do you yourself have a particular understanding of what growing the economy will take that differs from what is probably going to be followed by the GNU or by other opposition parties?
Look, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to be followed by the GNU, because you have, as players that we know are confirmed, the ANC and the DA, for instance, who have quite opposing views as it pertains to, for instance, issues of economic redress. So those are some of the things, you know, that need a little bit more detail and are going to be interesting to see what that looks like. But as far as we're concerned, we've always been very clear that economic inclusion is, first of all, primary in our own policy. We had a manifesto which we called the Jobs Plan, and we spoke about having a job in every home. What we're clear about, though, is that, you know, the mainstream economy, as it were, for lack of a better term, is not currently able to absorb the level of unemployment that we have in this country. And so you have to make sure that you are looking at SMEs, that you're looking at township economy. That's been a focus of our own policy in ensuring that you're able to have economic growth. Some of the targets that the NDP outlined, we're still far from them. For instance, we know that currently SMEs contribute about 33% to the GDP, whereas the target is 60%. We know that SMEs employ 50 to 60% of South Africans, whereas we're looking at about 90%. And we're certain that what that needs is thorough and intentional investment into SMEs and particularly into the township economy, so that we start to see economic inclusion as well.
Yeah. There's some parallels there, I mean, Mr. Mashaba, in terms of what you say. You say open the market, let the market do what it needs to do. It will raise money, there'll be more tax, the economy will grow, you'll be able to hire more people. Stop this thing of interfering with all sorts of policies of transformation like BEE and so on and so forth. Is that in a nutshell how you think this should be approached?
Well, Thabo, as you're aware, ActionSA had a policy conference in September last year from the 12th to the 14th and came out with very practical policy consideration that can assist in propelling the economic recovery of our country. And one of, obviously, aspect of our economic policy is actually to believe in free market economy, because if you are not going to have your economic policies based on growth, but growth can only happen when you allow the private sector to really be the players, and the government's role is to create an enabling environment to create equal opportunity, not equal outcome. However, Thabo, something that we need to really make it really very clear as ActionSA. ActionSA believes in black economic empowerment, because we cannot live in this country where we are known all over the world to be the most unequal society in the world. The only thing that we are against is ANC BEE Act of 2000. For we have developed our own economic policy called inclusive economic policy, where we would obviously want to get the proceeds of empowerment actually reaching ordinary Black, Indian, and colored communities in South Africa without actually punishing businesses. Make it really easy so that the system of contributing to what we call the Opportunity Fund is as friendly as possible. And this money must be used to ensure that we develop Black entrepreneurship, entrepreneurs and unleash them in the townships. Make sure that there's no Black child who is unable to go to school because the parents are unable to assist them.
Yeah. So what we will be hearing in the next 5 years from ActionSA MPs in that National Assembly is that your minimum program for transformation would be the Opportunity Fund.
Yeah, well, I think, look, at the moment, it is ActionSA's policy, it's not the policy of this coalition government. We'll see. Actually, this is going to be a very, very interesting relationship because, as you are aware, Triple B is an ANC policy, and now, as you are aware, DA does not really believe in Black economic empowerment, which we as ActionSA, we are saying is we want the Black economic empowerment, but the Black economic empowerment must be real empowerment of ordinary South Africans, not those who are politically connected. Right. You don't have to benefit because you belong to ActionSA or you're closer to politicians. You must benefit because you've really been discriminated by many years of discriminatory laws in our country before 1994. And you were discriminated in the last 30 years because you did not really have the right T-shirt, you do not belong to the right party. Yeah. The ordinary South Africans are the ones to really benefit out of this. Right. And I think what is important when you think about growing the economy, the rule of law is so crucial. No country has ever made it in an environment of chaos. If you look at South Africa today, with having the highest unemployment rate in the world, we having the rape capital of the world. Unfortunately, such crimes, unfortunately, they discourage investment in your country. So you need a system where we deal with corruption. You steal a cent of public money, there's got to really be consequences. Whether you're a politician or a businessman, you steal the public monies, there's got to be consequences. Unfortunately, the chaos we've experienced over the last 30 years, compromising the rule of law, has unfortunately in the process compromised our economic growth as a country.
Nobuntu, you have called for different or new empowerment policies. How would you approach transformation? What would be your minimum program?
So, I spoke earlier about how we've had what you've called a mainstream economy, and then we've got SMEs and some of the informal trade and the informal economy. And so for us, it's two-pronged. It's making sure that you invest in what you'll call maybe the secondary economy to make sure that you're then ultimately, secondly, able to integrate these economies. So what we're saying is, let's establish a Jobs and Justice Fund. This Jobs and Justice Fund will pool all the empowerment funding, whether it's from public and private sector, into one fund that is, first of all, able to invest in infrastructure. So if you're saying that you want to expand the economy, and by expand, you want to grow the economy, but you also want to speak about expansion geographically. Make sure that actually people are even able to work where they live, because that actually has other implications as well. It means that people have more money to spend within the economy because now they don't have to spend half of their salaries on travel. So if you have a Jobs and Justice Fund, you make sure that you're able to invest in infrastructure in the township. You make sure that you're able to allocate special economic zones in townships. You have tax incentives, you have employment benefits and employment incentives that come out of that. That's the first.
Yeah. How vastly different is that from the Opportunity Fund?
It's different because, first of all, we're speaking about special economic zones. And so the Special Economic Zones Act speaks already to what benefits can come out of that. So we're very specific in saying you identify special economic zones, and so you're investing in areas where you are sure that you will have the benefit because these are special economic zones. That's a start. But we're also saying that use that same fund to be able to develop infrastructure in those areas. Make sure that your roads, your ICT, all the infrastructure that you need to be able to support a thriving economy is there. And then we're also speaking about a vocational and skills development, particularly for young people, because one of the issues that we have in our economy is that we don't have the skills. We don't have the skills and specialization that we need, and that is in demand in the world and in South Africa today to be able to grow the economy. So we're saying that you also invest in a vocational year for young people in specialized education through TVET colleges for young people to make sure that we are increasing the level of skills that we have in order to be able to. So you're speaking about, first of all, technology and research. Those are skills that we really need to develop in this country. But you're also talking about tertiary manufacturing, other advanced manufacturing, other advanced sectors where we can see that we actually have an opportunity in manufacturing in this country, especially when it comes to tertiary manufacturing, especially when it comes to advanced manufacturing. You're finding that there's a gap that we still haven't filled. There's an opportunity there to be able to grow in that area. So it's those skills. It's skills that are in technology. It's skills that are in ICT, for instance, making sure that we have those skills that are in demand and skills that actually sit as a gap and as an opportunity for us to be able to grow our economy.
Right, back live with you tonight here on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. ActionSA leader Herman Mashaba, Build One South Africa deputy leader Nobuntu Hlazo-Webster, one still weighing their options, that's Bosa, on whether they'll be part of it or they'll be sitting as opposition. ActionSA definitely sure they'll be bringing the opposition to that National Assembly with those members of ActionSA that are going to be there. How do we approach the question of skills, Mr. Mashaba?
Well, Thabo, growing the economy and creating jobs for your citizen, more especially in the South African context, is not something that we must actually make it an educational exercise. This is something where we do not have to really be rocket scientists. We know education-wise, the last 30 years, we have dismally failed. That is why it is for that reason, Thabo, today, when you're looking for a plumber or you're looking for an electrician in this country or a bricklayer, it's a huge challenge because this government over the last 30 years has actually failed to produce these critical skills to actually grow the economy. You look at another example, Thabo, that's really so simple exercise. When I grew up, there's something I always tell people that when I grew up, South Africa was short of labor. That's why the apartheid government had what they used to call the Lawforce Gap, because South Africa was short of labor. For an example, take Babelech industrial area or Haranku industrial area where I started Black Like Me in 1985. Those industrial areas, I was brought up in by my sisters. I was brought up in a child-headed household with my sisters walking to Babelech industrial area. Probably millions of people who were used to really be employed in those factories, operating some of them 24 hours a day. Unfortunately, our democratic dispensation emerged and we then unleashed the labor unions on these businesses without having to actually protect them, because as the role of government is to make sure that when you need to create jobs, you obviously have to protect the investors. You have to protect the labor, but you cannot really just really say in our case where we went aggressive. Because, yes, one would understand we come from an oppressive system, but that does not really make it right where you then make it difficult for investors to invest. Because look at what has happened. The Belgian industrial area, Manskrel today, unemployment in those areas is what, 60-70%?
Yeah.
Those factories are lying empty. And these are assets belonging to us people of South Africa. We need to, when we talk about special economic zones, those factories are already there. Give them to the private sector, incentivize them.
Yeah.
Go to the Americas or the Western countries, even the Chinese. It is very expensive to manufacture in China today because it's already a developed country. South Africa, we're sitting with the highest unemployment rate in the world. Factories that are lying empty. Let's move your factories from China. Come and re-establish your manufacturing based in Ga-Rankuwa, in Mabopane, in KwaNdebele, in Twatwa, and so forth. The factories are there, the infrastructure is already there. So if we can actually stop having conferences and debates around this matter, let's have the political will to attract investments. But at the same time, what you do, let us invest in technical training of, as I said to you earlier on.
Somebody would say, listening to you then, how different is that from the minimum program of the Government of National Unity? Because they have also prioritized industrialization. They say one of the rapid ways in which we can bring about inclusive growth is industrialization, open factories.
Well, Thabo, if the last 30 years they focus on closing factories down, turning the city of Johannesburg and Tshwane and Durban into slums, I cannot understand why must you actually first break and then 30 years later when people vote you out and you then say, I'm going to rebuilding. I think that program, this new government, this coalition government is not the right platform because they don't have the political will. They are not prepared to really deal with corruption. I mean, listening to the president today was really so disappointing. We're not really coming out very strong with the plans to say to us as South Africans, firstly, I'm going to protect you that this country is not going to be the mega capital of the world any longer. We are not going to allow women to be raped like this. We are going to have control on our borders. We know this country was built at the back of migrants, and we want people of the world to come to South Africa. But we cannot allow South Africa to really be the playground of undocumented people. We cannot allow South Africa to be a dumping place of expired the goods and allow people from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and whatever running small businesses in our communities. So that these are things that the president should have taken South Africa into confidence that we've made a mistake. But this is how we're going to address them.
So you won't support a view of a foreign policy based on human rights, African agenda, solidarity, peaceful resolution of conflict, national interest being there, but multilateralism also something that being pursued.
Well, Thabo and fellow South Africans, our house is bathing right now. When we have 43% unemployment, the highest sustainable unemployment rate in the world. And you tell me, us as South Africa, that we must open our borders to everyone to come and run small shops in our communities. They must bring in counterfeit goods, expired goods in our country. And you talk about human rights. What about human rights of the 12 million South Africans? What about the human rights of 54% of our people who tonight slept without having anything to eat? Men and women tomorrow, 12 million of them, they don't have anywhere to go tomorrow to go to work.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to do, we need to put out the fires in our country. We must be selfish, we must be patriots, and we must be unapologetic about this, that South Africa first. And when we can use that kind of approach, you will see how this economy will grow at between 5 and 10%, even more. Because South Africa right now is in an ideal position because of obviously high unemployment rate. But we've got the infrastructure that can assist us to unleash our potential. But we must never allow anyone in the world to come and dictate to us how we must look after our own people.
Aspects of existing labor laws that are hindering the growth of the economy, that are hindering companies from functioning. What is your approach to that?
So first of all, I just actually want to speak to this issue of immigration and to say that we really need to look at it, first of all, the push factors. And I think we can never talk about that issue without talking about our own bilateral relationships and how we're holding our neighbors to account for what is happening. And that is, for me, one of the biggest failures of this government, where we have neighbors, where we have seen some of the atrocities that are happening in the closest countries to us, and our own diplomacy, when we're able to intervene in the Middle East, yet we're not able to intervene next door. So I think that that's important to note. And to say that there needs to be quite a structured way of making sure that human rights are preserved while we deal with the issue of undocumented immigrants in this country. But also to make sure that we say, when it pertains to business, there are ways of making sure that laws are kept, that laws are implemented, and we're not doing that enough. So before we talk about interventions that violate human rights, we need to speak about the low-hanging fruits and the realities that exist now. So as it pertains to labor laws, I think as it pertains to just regulations as a whole, there is a need to cut the red tape. And we know that there was a red tape committee that was appointed, but we have not seen significantly over 5 years since that appointment. We have not seen adequate cutting of red tape, so to speak, because we still have regulations that make it difficult for people to start businesses as a start, regulations that make it difficult and cumbersome for employment to take place in this country. And so we do need to look at making it easier for businesses, and that's one of the hurdles that are faced in this country by business, and that's one of the hurdles that leads to it being difficult for us to increase the employment in this country. So we need to look at regulations with regards to starting businesses, to running businesses in this country, as well as to employing and to growing the number of people that businesses, particularly small businesses, are able to employ.
Do you think a national dialogue is going to help us to get to the bottom of that?
A national dialogue, first of all, if you're talking about the national dialogue that has been put on the table by the ANC, a national dialogue is important, but one of the things that we advocated for right at the start of this process was to say, have somebody who's independent, who convenes a dialogue of sorts between political parties and, when the time is right, between other stakeholders. So while the agenda is still being set by one political party and led by one political party, versus parties coalescing and coming around the table as equal participants in a discussion, it's going to be difficult to put the interests of all South Africans first and to have the voices of all South Africans represented around that table. You know, one of the issues that before I was in politics, one of the issues that really struck at me was how, when political parties engage about any issue, it's often about the interests of the political parties and less about the interests of this country and the citizens of this country. And so a national dialogue is important, but it's important that you have an independent convener so that the issues don't become about political parties and their agendas, but we really put the issues of South Africans first. So if we say we're talking about the economy, if we're talking about some of the issues that you're raising here, let's make sure that it is indeed about South Africa and not about our own agendas as parties and what we stand to benefit from having our way in those engagements.
Appreciate your time. Wish you a good season in the 7th administration. Mr. Mashaba, thank you very much for coming on. We'll be touching base with you again soon. All right, your views tonight, 072-110-5584. Drop us an X at Newzroom 405. Your views on that conversation. We're back in a minute.